Welcome to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. I'm your host, Troy Hammond, and on today's episode, we're chatting with Dale Clareburt. Dale is the co-founder and CEO of Weirdly, which is a recruitment software that you'll hear about on the podcast. Today wasn't my first ever chat with Dale. We actually worked together a lifetime ago, and we go through that and where she's at now. I hope you enjoy.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning into the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
Have you always been in recruitment?
No. I don't know if anyone wakes up in the morning or as a kid and says, I want to be a recruiter when I grow up.
I think I can confirm that I don't think anyone does that.
No, not
or
ever.
Should they?
No. I didn't have a career path or anything. I did the whole classic Kiwi OE and went over to the UK with nothing, no qualifications, and just had a really fun time. And then came back and was just looking for some temp work and started just typing CVs. That's what I did for about 3 weeks. And in fact, I had another job offer. I was supposed to go to Hewlett-Packard. Glad I didn't do that. And Winnis and Marissa ended up keeping me on.
So Madison was your first job?
Yeah, it was. It made me who I am today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was my very first recruitment job, should I say. If I go back before that, I worked for Auckland Regional Council, which doesn't exist anymore either. And it's quite funny. My first job was I was filing and I was a records manager in a council. And I used to wear pigtails and sparkly bangles and fake fur vests and I don't know if you remember those shoes, those big, thick buffalo shoes.
Yeah, you would have been...
I stood out.
Yeah.
And then I went on my OE and then I came back and started in recruitment and I was with Madison for 10 years.
Wow. I didn't know that you were with Madison that whole time.
Mm.
Yeah, it's funny now. Like my daughter asked me for a job a couple of months ago. And I was like, well, there's nothing really you can do. You know, I don't really want to hire my daughter just for the sake of hiring my daughter. But she was like, I just want some part-time hours. And I was like, there's no CVs and there's no manual stuff anymore. And I was like, reference checking, it's not that credible. Your 13-year-old daughter ringing up for a reference. And so, yeah, it's changed. The industry's changed. But it used to be that anyone could sort of come in and do some part-time filing or things. And
it was, when you think about that sort of generational shift, when we started, when I was at Madison, we were typing resumes and then we were binding them and putting plastic and covers and then couriering them to the customer. And then there would be that sort of one person would be on the phone on a Thursday afternoon putting run-on ads in the New Zealand Herald. And we would be standing next to them, writing them and giving them to the person to quickly load up.
And pigeonholes still? Were you there at the pigeonhole era?
Yeah, you put CVs and application forms from people who came in from reception and so on. Oh my goodness, you're taking me back, making me feel old. It has been over 20 years, that I've been in the industry. Yeah,
it's funny that I get that calls. You're an old recruiter. Can you come in and give us some advice? And I'm like, oh fuck, I'm that guy now.
That's true. And at a time like now, and in startup land, recruitment's the hardest thing. People are really struggling with that. So I have been glad of having that experience, and that's why Weirdly is what it is. I suppose I'm still in the industry with recruitment. Yeah.
And how were you able to rise through Madison so quickly?
Oh, do you know what? When I look back at Madison was a startup.
Yeah.
Right? And the attitude of the two founders and the other two CEOs, Winnis and Marissa, they were all about sort of running out and doing the sales and then winning business, and then we had to deliver on that. And something that I was quite good at was logistics and operations and getting stuff done at volume.
Yep.
And they started in call centre and in volume, which is funnily enough where Weirdly's ended up. We'll talk about that soon. But and that's what I was just really good at that, and I worked really hard. I can remember having, I was there for a year, had my first son. I used to bring him in on the weekends, chuck a jolly jumper in the door frame, pop him in the jolly jumper, and I was working through just typing resumes. It was just one of those jobs where there was just
Startup
volume.
Hustle.
Rinse, repeat, and I just loved it. And then we just went on. The company just kept growing and growing. And so then my team grew. I took on a leadership role. Then I took on another team, the temp sort of business support area.
Yeah.
And then they just kept growing and growing. They just kept bringing on more work, and the business exploded, and I was able to grow with it. Had probably a different job every year. So they gave me the opportunity, and I rose to the occasion as much as I could all the way through. And it was really exciting. It was like being in a recruitment startup.
Yeah, I remember you were chief operating officer or chief operating officer when I joined.
Yeah, I was at the end, in the last couple of years, and that's when there were 5 branches before exit. I know they had an exit after I left, so it was before that time.
Yeah.
It was really cool, really exciting. We went through the GFC, started to come out the other side. I finished in 2009, so it was still, feeling
Yeah.
the pain of that, but definitely coming out the other side.
Yeah.
Great business, great people, great culture for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah, I am. So you must have left just after I left, because I think I finished up in 2009 as well. I wasn't there that long. My daughter was born. I remember I lost my job during the GFC, and then I had like a bunch of different offers on the table, and I probably wasn't going to take medicine. And then I rang Jane and said, probably not that keen. And then she changed the dollar figure on my contract a little bit, and I was thinking, my father coming, I'm shitting myself maybe. And then I was like, no, I'll just go and have another chat with her. And that last chat, like, I really liked Jane. She was great. And so I was like, all right, I'll sign on. But it was tough times in the GFC.
It was. That would have been a tough time. I mean, it's kind of the time that we're experiencing right now, isn't it? So this is our second time around.
Yeah. And so how did Weirdly then come about? Like, what was it? Did it come from you working at Madison and seeing first-hand experience?
Yeah, I think that I got a hankering for being able to do something myself, and being lucky to be so close to the CEOs in the business and seeing what they went through and how they did it, and thinking I understood that. Started a small agency with my partner and husband now, and that was okay. But one of the things that we felt when we were doing it is that with recruitment, a lot of it's so much in the individuals and their book, which is in their head, and their relationships and their understanding of the market, and wasn't something that could scale. Yeah. So realised we needed to have a go at building a product that was something that could scale. And took from the experience when we very first started Weirdly, the concept was we want to build a product. It needs to be in something that we understand or adjacent to something that we understand. We speak to lots of different organisations about the pain that they have in recruitment. It always it turns out to be about culture, purpose, values. I had a conversation with Tim Alp at Juicy, and he said to me, why can you recruit people better than I can that match the culture? And I just said, well, because that's my job, to get people to take the interview uniform off and to show me who they really are. Yeah. And he said, if you could build something like that, I'd buy it. And so we came up with the first iteration of Weirdly, and he was our first customer.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so had you done anything like this before? Had you done software before?
No, I'm not a technical person at all. I get laughed at still. Someone will say, have you downloaded the app? And I'll say, yeah, I'm apping. Like I'm not a technical person, but I really understood customers' pain, because they're the people that I talk to all the time. And that was my value that I brought to the table when we started this business, is recruitment, network, knowledge, and the end customer, and being able to sell. And then we brought in other people who could support us in other ways. That's why there's 4 founders, not just one.
Yeah. And what was Weirdly when it very first started? Like, talk me through the product.
It was culture quizzes, culture, values, purpose. If we look at organisations, we started with small organisations that were really careful about who they hired, understanding that the wrong person, the wrong fit would have real damage. And that was naturally startups, some in the US, some in New Zealand. Small businesses, like I mentioned, Juicy, Glengarry's. And
Vend, I was working at Vend when we were using Weirdly.
Oh, yes, you were one of the first ones as well, yeah. And it was about giving candidates an experience in the process and giving them the chance to see whether they aligned with an organisation. And it was as much for them as it was for the organisation. So the organisation gets a report back. The quiz questions were around the values, the things that made an organisation unique, that was unique to them. And we would put that into the recruitment process to help with decision making. Yeah. And that was great, and it worked okay. But we're coming up 9 years in April, and the journey, the first 5 or 6 years, were a lot of experiments until we really found where we were supposed to be.
Yeah, what were some of those? Talk me through some of those experiments and attempts.
So the experiments were, we did a few sort of in the early years. We were young, we were naive, we were looking through rose-tinted glasses, so we thought we wanted to be a really fast-growing SMB product, SaaS product. That's what we're going to do. With no marketing and not very much capital, but a lot of enthusiasm. Of the founders, 2 of the founders, one's my husband, and he's in recruitment as well, but the other 2 are brand strategists and culture design people. Yeah. And really, really experienced, younger, new stuff that we didn't. And so the brand was a really big part that we played on. It's Karen Phillips, who's one of the other founders. That was what she brought to the party, and that's why the Weirdly brand really exploded. Yeah. And then we had Hayden doing the design, and that's why the product doesn't look like a standard ATS or a standard recruitment product. So we got these people with really objective views, and we sort of burst out and just had every small business we could in New Zealand using our product at that sort of $39.99 a month sort of concept. But what we learned was that how difficult it was to sell to small businesses to spend $1,000 a year or $300 a year. It actually was not much more work to sell $12,000 a year, $24,000 a year, and so on, because $99 a month really matters to a small business. Yeah. And so we were really sort of stuck at that growth stage, and it was really fun and it was really cool. We were making a difference, but then it were just peaks and troughs, and we just didn't have the budget behind it. And so we started going up market into much bigger organisations.
And how do you do that? Like, how does a small, edgy, cool business all of a sudden say, all right, I'm going to be an enterprise business tomorrow and this is what we're going to do?
Well, we sort of started working our way up. And so in New Zealand, there aren't a lot of enterprise businesses. They're just not what we would call true enterprise. There aren't many businesses that have more than 8,000, 12,000 people. And so we broke in through call centre because that's what I knew, and how so we went into areas of the business where they had high volume, a lot of people to process with few roles. Graduate recruitment was another way that we went in, and that's kind of fun, quirky, using our brand and using our quizzes. And we would also research just looking in the market for people who really cared about values and purpose. They needed to be talking about that, because if they didn't care about it, then they weren't going to care about our quizzes. Yeah. And so we experimented. But again, what we found and why it wasn't working is our product was going inside someone else's product, and it was really hard for us to demonstrate or measure accurately ROI. Yeah. And so someone took a chance on us, and we ended up building a bigger product.
Well, building an ATS, right, or building anything to do with recruitment, fuck that, if I'm honest, so I use Trello for my clients a lot, and so I set up Trello boards, and we integrate, and we move cards together, and every client I do this with loves it. They love the interaction, and I keep saying, Dan, my business partner and I, we keep saying, we should build an ATS that does this, and every time I look into it, I'm like, fuck no, let's not do that. But so why the hell and how the hell? Talk me through this. I'm interested.
It was volume and data. So if you take a culture assessment or values quiz and you put that into someone's recruitment process, so we had Square payments in the US. We worked with a few other big ones over there, IBM, etc. They would only put us in one place, and then it was hard to sort of jimmy our way into another ATS. And we got a great salesperson who's no longer with us, unfortunately, but was in Australia, and she got us into the retail space, and that was when everything changed. So we had an opportunity with Target in Australia, and we had a really great contact in there who was a bit of a risk taker and an early adopter, Misha, and we sold the quiz, a culture quiz in, and then she said, oh, could you do this as well? Because I want to separate out my store, my volume recruitment from my corporate recruitment. And we went, sure, of course we can. 4 weeks later, we built a mini sort of, I guess you'd say, interview processing tool, and we integrated with the best in breed in the market, and we built this in 4 weeks, and we went live, and she just put us live. We didn't even know. We turned up to do training. She says, oh, you're live? On the day. This is 4 years ago in August. And then suddenly it was tens of thousands of people doing our quiz rather than 1,000 people a year or 2,000 people a year. And then it was hundreds of thousands. And then you've got that much data. It just builds the validity. It builds the experience. And we took, it's not a Trello concept, but we took the parts that we thought needed to change and we put design on top of it rather than just building a faster ATS. What is your problem? Then we found a way to solve it, and our designers did that. And Hayden, that's our one of our other founders, and they just found unique ways of approaching problems. And it was like, the customers, it was night and day. They would go in and then they would ring each other at night and go, oh my God, I can just move this person to here and it's just magic. And we changed lives overnight, saving them so much time, increasing the quality of hire. Everything just changed. And we had all of these wonderful testimonials and big people talking about it.
Awesome. Yeah. So ATS, for people listening, I have no idea what that is because I throw out ATS all the time. It's applicant tracking system, which is used the database that we use in recruitment or internally to hold and...
Yeah, it's hard because the name means bad things and good things, and it has connotations and it gets overused. We're a bit of a CRM. We've got a lot more going on. But I guess the key takeaway for us is we're working with frontline retail, a lot of first jobbers, which is where our passion lies, with kids aged between the age sort of 15 to 21 is our perfect age group, although other people go through the platform. But with peak hiring in organisations like Target and Kmart and BCF, and there's bigger groups of retailers in Australia. They're just processing so many people and hiring in such a short time. So we automate all of it.
Yeah.
From when they first register to the moment that they get a contract.
And have kids changed like over the years? Like,
yeah,
I feel like kids are a lot different than what 5 years ago.
Here's some interesting trivia for you. In our research, because we've been going quite deep on it for the last 4 years, kids are motivated by brands. They love Kmart, quite a cult following. Also heavily motivated by free carbohydrates. So Baker's Delight's really popular. Domino's is really popular.
Because they get free food?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and also we've heard that kids don't mind putting Domino's branding on their cars. They quite like it. It can be quite fun. So it's really interesting when you think of the brands that they would be attracted to.
Yeah.
And all of this learning that you get, they all want part-time work. The one thing I will say that has changed and that's been hard is the demographic of the kids that are applying for these jobs and the reasons why they need them.
Yeah, because they need the money. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really shifted in the last couple of years for obvious reasons. And you have kids that possibly for long periods of time took up part-time employment whilst they weren't at school because school was closed. And then getting those kids back to school is hard. There's quite a lot of shift that's happened in both markets.
Yeah. Well, and so do you think, because obviously, already talking to you for 5 minutes, we've heard about a few pivots already. Do you think it's easy that you've been able to pivot to these and find these markets because you haven't come from a traditional sort of software background and you're just going where you feel it's right? Or do you think that you learnt?
I think that I've got in the founder group, I've got a really strong personality and a loud voice. I'm the biggest extrovert.
Yeah.
And I have probably heavily influenced it sometimes in a more traditional route, whereas Kieran and Hayden are more open to looking at things from a different perspective. So I think the first few years we were able to hold for quite a while trying to do things quite differently, and I think that really was great.
Yeah.
Now when you get into this volume space, it's quite tough to stay that course. So I feel like we've got a really good base of being quite open. But then when you get to a point when we're still small where you have to still chase the money, sometimes you can't always do things the way that you want to and you get forced down a path. But I think the four of us definitely, particularly for the first 7 years, 8 years, really tried hard not to just go down a traditional path and just build the same thing as a competitor, just faster or a different colour, or, we really tried to do things differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's been evident right from this as soon as I heard the name to now, right? And so weirdly, such a great name. Talk me through. I know. This
we get asked all the time. Yeah,
for people listening.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things in the world, naming your company. You've got to come up with so many different ways of thinking about it. How is it going to be pronounced in different countries? What connotations does the word have in another country? And then what if when you start, you change. So you've got to be careful that what you call it, you're not stuck in a box. And Kieran actually came up with it weirdly, and it came down to the uniqueness of people. So we started with culture, purpose and values at our core, and getting alignment for organisations and for people as they come together in the recruitment process, and understanding that every organisation is unique and so is every individual, and actually finding out that you don't fit somewhere is actually a really good thing.
Yeah.
And but also understanding a bit more about yourself and an organisation. So it's helping, at that cross-section of where that happens. And it's celebrating uniqueness in everyone and every organisation and culture.
Yeah. Do you think, not to get political, right, but do you think companies have changed a little bit now where they're scared to talk about their culture and what makes them unique and different?
The word culture, if they get worn out, it's like the word unprecedented. Those the people just, they lose their meaning and then they get different interpretation. Culture fit is really taboo now. People don't like talking about it. And we're looking for culture add was a few years ago. That was the popular way of talking about it. But the way that we look at it is understanding who you are is really important, and as a person and as an organisation, but also understanding that culture isn't permanent.
Yeah.
So and the way that someone interprets a value is actually really cool, so long as they can find an alignment with it. The way that they interpret or align with it could be different. And we just help organisations go on that journey when we're going through the process with them. And again, our product as well isn't the deep organisational psych 1 hour test. We're giving everyone an opportunity. So it's a short assessment just to get a taster for how it could be.
Yeah, which I think is good, right? Because if you break it down for me, we naturally like it. So I'm reading a book at the moment. It's called Sapiens. Highly recommend it. Good book. And so they talk about how as people over the years, through the test of time, we're Erectus and like all the Neanderthals, and how once you get to a level of 130 people or more, you become your own individualized group and things happen, right? And so that's when we start gossiping more, we start doing these things more, personalities change because of the culture and nature of the group. And so scientifically, right, and I'm probably going to get caught out on this, but you naturally have these little organic cultures that happen, right? And so companies now that are trying to engineer by saying we don't have a culture fit because, you know, we're inclusive to everyone. Fantastic. We should be inclusive to everyone, but you're always going to have a nuance to your culture. Yeah. And so finding a snapshot of that culture for me is really important, you know, and what's the story of the company and what's the culture. And so I think products like Weirdly are fantastic for me because you get to understand really quickly like what it's like working there and what it's like with that person. And I think that's really important in this day and age.
Yeah, it was something that we realised when you think about the standard process, even going back to when we used to print resumes, that person is contained on some paper or it's just and that isn't who they are.
Yeah.
And then you have this culture shock that can occur when you meet someone for the first time and you realise you shouldn't have come, you know? And I think that giving someone a little bit more information before they go is really helpful, and on both sides.
Yeah.
And it also can be icebreakers, something to talk about, and you get feedback. So, yeah, and that's sort of where we started. But what we have moved into as well in this area, if you're thinking about processing hundreds of thousands of candidates through, it's about speed.
Yeah.
So we're in a market where there's a talent shortage in retail.
Yeah.
You walk down the street, every single store you walk past, everywhere, everyone's crying out for frontline staff. So if they're walking into a shopping centre and they go and apply for 10 jobs, they're going to go with the one that is fastest, that they build trust with the quickest, which means if they say they're going to give them a contract, they give it to them on time. Fast interview, you know, all of this process, and that's where we've ended up seeing the real magic. Our quizzes go in part of that process, but we could get someone from a walk-in and a contract in their hand in a couple of hours.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that with because let's break this down, right? So 4 founders, you seem to work really well together. Did you have a conversation at the start about how you would work together, or has it just naturally happened?
It's a bit of both. I think we sort of started out thinking that we knew that fundamentally the recruitment process was broken. We're a really different group of people. There's no two ways about it, and I think there's been real strength in that. It's been a long time. We're having some tough times. We've had some peaks and troughs of things.
Yep.
But we've managed to stay the path and stay the course together. And that's been great. But it was really important for us when we sat down, like, here's a funny story. When we started, we all got to say something. We had a whiteboard. How are we going to do it? What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And I said, number one, I'm not being the CEO. No way. And then 6 months later, I had to be just because we got some investment and there needed to be a structure. But we always, the one thing that we did all agree on was this people, that we really cared about that. We really cared about candidates almost more than businesses, although businesses pay the bills. Yeah. So there was that thread in there. And we're good people, you know. We're not dicks. Well, I don't think we are.
I can confirm that. I bet you all. Yeah.
And we've always done everything with the best of intentions and created a culture of our own where we really care about our people. Yeah. And they're all very different and unique. And so we've taken that, and there's been some rough times, but I think we've stayed the course.
Awesome. So James Fuller was on the podcast previously to you.
Oh, right.
He is the co-founder of Henry with his wife.
Oh, wow.
He said,
is that him?
Yeah, he said that people often ask him, how do you found a business with your wife? And he said, I don't know how people don't found a business with their wife. And it's because you get to share the knowledge and share the ups and downs and the like. And so obviously Simon and you are co-founders together. What do you feel the same, obviously?
Yeah, we worked together with another business that we had for a short time called Talent Magnet, which was an agency that we tried to sort of get off the ground, but then we moved into Weirdly. I love it. It works really well now because we work remotely as well, but you understand the shorthand that is startup. You understand that if you're on the phone talking to someone at 11 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning, that's totally acceptable behaviour, and you're in it together. And it could be him, it could be me. That's just the way it works. And so I think that if we hadn't had that experience, now Simon works somewhere else, and he watches me, and he's working in another startup. But that understanding of startup and what it takes is vital.
Yeah.
And you just work around it.
Yeah, it's tough work, right? And that the guilt association of, like when you're working all hours of the night and taking a call at 3 a.m. is tough unless people know what you're going through, right?
That's right. And you naturally fill in. So you don't just understand it and not resent it. You see a gap. So we've got 3 children, not together, but we've got 3 kids in the house. And so, and he, I must say, does most of the dinner. Mostly does the dinner these days because I'm often working Australian hours. And but you just naturally do it. There's no question because you sort of just get into a rhythm of filling the gaps where you need to when you're working in a household that is a startup.
So that's obviously, so Simon's off now doing his own.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is obviously as a founder, in our group, I will say, we took salary sacrifices and we had one household with both of us not earning what we should be. We had to make a decision a few years ago and he's now working at Soul Machines.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, nice. And so do you think that you would do it all over again? Would you, if you're knowing what you know now, would you do the same?
If I had all the knowledge I have now, yes, because I would fast forward, I would be where we are now in a startup, whatever I chose, probably the same industry but different product, in 2 years.
And what do you think, what are some of the things that you know now that you were like, I wish I had done that earlier?
I wish that I'd thought, or I didn't know much about what it was going to take. I wish I knew more about how to structure for the long term for investment.
Yeah.
Really lucky to be working with Punukaiki. They've been very founder-centric and supported me the whole way. But I also know now, with what I know now, is that, I need to have prepared that from a dilution perspective because we've got some challenges with our cap table now, which we're fixing. I would probably fail faster at a couple of things. Maybe I would stop and start again. This is almost a third business inside an 8-year-old business that we've got now when I think about finally finding the perfect product market fit for us.
Yeah.
We talk about the fact that we think we're a 3-year-old business in an 8-year-old's body. And if we didn't have those first 5 years, we'd be in quite a different place because we're incredibly successful the last 3 years. Those first 5 are still dragging behind us. But I would, again, I don't think ever I would want to do it on my own. I think 4 founders was fine. In the early days, some people went against that and said that's crazy.
Yeah.
Don't do that. You're going to have fight and it's going to be a real problem. I don't think that we had big enough problems for us not to do something like that again. I've been thinking about this a lot before coming on the podcast. I travelled a lot alone.
Yeah.
Because we tried to go to the US and that was expensive, but I only flew economy and I stayed in backpackers. In America, they give you free bagels for breakfast. So I was very careful with that, but it was lonely.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's something, if I look back, there's a lot of things that I tackled alone. And even though it might have cost more to have someone with me, I think it would have driven higher results, better results and better performance. I've bottlenecked the business. I'm sounding really hard on myself, but it's really easy right now to do some reflection because we're going through some change. I could do quite a lot and I held on to a lot of stuff for too long.
Yeah.
And so I would let that go. We never had a technical founder. I look back on that and I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. We were really strong on sales. We were really strong on networking, and we've got a really good product now. So I don't know if I would change that or not, or whether that would be a deal breaker for me moving forward. It hasn't been as fun in the last couple of years. The first 5 years were really fun, and I need to bring the fun back. I'm taking it too seriously.
I remember some really fun moments. I remember when you came into the Vend office with like a Mexican, was it like?
Yeah, it was our first year birthday.
Yeah.
This is what I was saying. This is what was great with Kieran would come up with these amazing ideas because we didn't have a lot of money on the smell of an oily rag. We would go to conferences and you have to pay so much to go to a conference to get a stand. And she came up with these great ideas where we just bought blow-up stuff from Look Sharp, like palm trees and things like that for our stand because we couldn't afford to pay for the big boards. And then we bought a television because it was cheaper to buy one than it was to hire one, and then we gave it away at the end of the conference. So we would there were all of these thrifty ideas that actually made us come across as cute and quirky, which is what we were, and people wanted to love us. And what happens is as you grow, it's really hard to hold on to that.
Yeah.
And because you start taking everything too seriously. Because at the beginning, you don't know. You're footloose and fancy free. And you're like, this is fun. And then it all gets a bit harder.
Yeah. I constantly have that feeling. So I'm a consummate. I love to found things. I love to set things up. I love the early days when it's loose and who the hell knows what's going to happen. And then as soon as it's successful, I'm like, I'm bored of that now. I don't want to do that now. It's business and it's corporate-y, and I don't like that anymore. But that's because I'm honest with who I am as a person now. And so now I try and with companies that I set up, I hire someone straight away to do it, and I'll
That's
just
a great idea.
manage it from the side. But well, not manage it from the side, but set things up and then hire someone straight away. But yeah, I miss the early days and startup fun, right? And yeah, it's hard, but as the company grows, there's lots of challenges that come along the way, and VC money comes in and all the likes, and so it definitely changes you as a person.
It really does. When I think about the things that I didn't know 8 years ago and what I know now, it's a glossary of terms. It's understanding what is venture capital, how does that work, what's the process, what's a safe, what's a convertible note, I didn't know any of that. And you just have to learn how to do everything and be an expert as fast as possible on literally everything.
Yeah. Where did you learn it all?
I just learned on the job.
Yeah. Did you have people that you could talk to and ask, or did you?
I did. I've been really lucky to have some people who are advisors on sort of a casual advisors.
Yep.
Mike Carden from Joyous, and before he was at Joyous, I've been speaking to him, 3 or 4 times a year for a long time.
Yeah.
And he's been fantastic. But also I had a really strong advisory board of 6 people for about 3-4 years, including our investors, but also including people in the market. And they were really good at keeping me honest. You think you don't need a board when you're a small organisation, but it's amazing what changes in a month if you were meeting monthly or 2, and you're like, oh, I did do some stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was really good to have that and get that sort of helicopter kind of looking down view of the organisation, because when you're in it, it's really hard to look at the business in a bit more of an objective manner. So that gave me some perspective. But I wouldn't say that there was a 101 course.
Yeah.
When I'm troubled or I'm in a difficult position, my first instinct is just to reach out and just talk to 100 people.
Yeah.
Because every interaction, someone teaches you something and they've got a different perspective. And that's how we started. When we very first started, I launched into it first full time, and I was doing 50 meetings a week. And it's amazing in New Zealand, if you ask somebody if they want to give you an opinion on something, they're very happy to give it. And it was fantastic. And that's what I do. I reach out. I don't tend to sort of hide. I don't mind that I look like a dick. I'm sorry, I don't understand what this is. Can you please just tell me? And
that's great.
well, that's how it had to work, right?
Yeah.
And I said yes to absolutely everything. So I know you're doing that this year, but I if someone asked me to speak, that happened a lot. I would do it, and that was scary for me. A lot of people might not know. I didn't used to be able to public speak at all.
How did you change that?
You just make yourself do it, and you practice. One of my key tips for people when they're practicing with me is, if you're going to be speaking at an event and you're practicing and you do it at home, one of the things that you do is you do it in the same place. It's funny if you just go into another room or in a different area, how much you stumble. So it's about speaking in lots of different areas, getting feedback. I did a lot of showcases where you have to go on stage, speak, and then you come out and then people Dragon's Den you, and then you have to improve in 1 hour and do it again. So I was speaking monthly for a while.
Is it from capital raising stuff that you did?
Capital raising, working with NZTE. So we're on their we're in the multi-customer list there, and Focus 700. And I would do showcases for the Baldy business, for female business in general. Did a lot of them.
Yeah. What's your take on these, like, startup capital raise war things where they go in there and they have to pitch Dragon's Den style?
I think they're really good to build your confidence and to get your elevator pitch really tight.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say is if you're going to speak to 10 investors and there are 10 investors in the room, they all want to know something different.
Yeah.
They want to hear it in a different way. And so those are some of them, the big ones, are just nights out for people. And really you're still going to have to go and meet with people. But a lot of the time what I learned with them is that people either were already invested in and they were there to make the event look good, or we just weren't big enough. I often was on stage because I represented a minority group in some way sometimes. We look good and we've got a great story, but we just weren't as big sometimes as the people that were up there. I'm generalising. They were all quite different, but you just get used to going up there and standing up and doing the best you can.
Yeah.
But you need to learn to take feedback and you have to have very thick skin.
Well, that's the hardest thing, right? And I think if people, our audience, a lot of startup enthusiasts, obviously, right? Because we fucking love startups. But the biggest fear that they have is the fear of failure and the fear of feedback. And so how would you, in your words, say to someone, this is how you can take feedback and use it?
I don't know. One of my favourite things in the world is to be wrong. It's how you learn. If you think about your product, the best feedback you get is the bad stuff.
Yeah.
That's when you're really listening. And so it's the same for yourself. And what's incredible is what feels hard today is just going to be so easy tomorrow. So when I look at the things that I used to stay up at night really scared about, and then I would go to I'd go and do it, and then I'd feel exhilarated afterwards, and then 2 months later, that's a doddle. That's so easy for me. You just improve. It's like the hardest self-development program you'll ever go on. But practice in front of a mirror, do all the things you don't like. Listen to yourself, record yourself. I had videos done of myself when I used to give feedback to people in performance reviews, and they put it on fast forward, and I look like I'm going to whack people across the head because I go like this all the time. And you have to see it. And then as soon as you learn, you actually love it. Receiving feedback isn't as scary as the thought of about when you're about to receive it. You actually, it's so good. Like you feel a little bit vulnerable, but then you grow quite a lot.
Yeah.
And so the reward for feedback is actually far greater than the fear.
For me, I've always had imposter syndrome. I've always felt like whatever I'm doing, I didn't know what I was going to be doing. So I've always been like, feedback's great. I love it, because I didn't know what I was doing anyway. So the fact that you're helping me and telling me is fantastic. But so many people these days, especially startup founders, especially ones that haven't come, like it's their first time, they just put on this bullshit mask, they're perfect and, they're doing everything right all the time. And
yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I tell you something else I've found really valuable is hearing other people's stories because you see yourself. I will say with the books, I know you're reading a lot of books at the moment, I've found that people would recommend books for me, and if I wasn't ready in the moment or I wasn't at the right stage, then they didn't have the same impact. I think it's the same with the sort of journey that you're going on. So if you want feedback and you're looking for feedback, then you're in the right place. But if you're scared of it, then you're just not ready. Because once you get it, you become addicted to it. You almost run at doing things that where you might fail so that you can learn something.
Yeah.
And you have to get over the fear of failure if you've got to run towards it. Because the faster you fail, the faster you know how to change and what to do better. Because the worst thing is when you didn't ask and then later you look back and wish that you had. Like it's that kind of regret.
Should have saved myself 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
awesome.
right.
Yeah, I'm not sure about books on startups. Like I personally don't read many of them because I find it's the beautifully story-told perfect nirvana of what happened in that startup. I prefer grungy podcasts or, going to hit a meetup and hearing someone. I used to love Startup Grinds, their meetups, just to hear like fireside chat, people like, tell me the real shit, right? Tell me what really happened. So and that's the reason why we're trying to do this podcast is just be able to provide an open, authentic voice of people to tell their story so that everyone else can see it and go, oh, I can do that, And
well, that's right. I went to SASTA. I went to some of the big conferences in the US, and you get to see people who are like gods, the unicorn builders and so on. And it's really cool and it's kind of inspiring, but it's so far away from where I am right now. I get the best value from people who are a couple of years ahead. And I think, oh, gosh, that's not that far away from me. What have they learned? And also it's not out of date, because one thing about startup is what happened 10 years ago is no longer relevant today because it just isn't that. And so it's not as useful. It's just a great story. But I remember going to some of those fireside chats and things, and I know that there's some new ones coming back and being in a Flounders Club as well, where there's groups of us. It's when you're lonely as a founder and as a CEO, it's so valuable because you think you're alone and you think nobody else is going through what you're going through and no one else has these stories. And then you go out and you go, oh, their business has 200 people, exactly the same problems.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually get better. It just gets different.
Yeah.
And so that just makes you feel better. And so, yeah.
What would be the title of your book on founding a company, or what would be the one thing that you would say that was probably the key thing that people should think about?
For me, it's all personally. What's worked for me is I'm a list maker, and there are days when you can't move and you're immobilized sometimes by fear or you're scared of something. Always keep moving. You just have to do one thing and tick one thing off your list. And I've learned that activity makes momentum and gets you out of change. And it's that whole thing where the sun always sets and the sun always rises. Time keeps moving and time means change. And so even though it feels hard or it feels impossible, if you just take the first step or you just do one thing that gets you a step closer, it just makes the world a difference. Stopping is the worst thing you can do.
I think, like, especially with mental health, right, as founders, looking after ourselves, very important. Like you said that, some change happening weirdly, and I think for everyone this year it's going to be quite tough. What do you do to look after yourself?
Last year was a really tough year, so one of the things that I learned is that I can push myself really hard and I can work really hard. But if something gets out of balance in some of the areas that I'm not used to, that can be a challenge. So we had we've got three teenage boys, and they're not always happy all the time. And we had a couple of situations, which I'm sure lots of parents go through with their kids and kids go through with their parents, that rocked our boat a little bit last year without going into the details of it. But that and the stress, it weirdly, I kind of broke a little bit and had to take some urgent leave at a very inconvenient time just to focus inwards into my family. And it was a shock for everybody, the business and my family that I was around. And we've come back and we've made some changes. But 6 months ago, the things that used to run through my head on a daily basis around how am I going to do this? How am I going to keep going? What's the easiest way to keep moving forward? Like that, just in panic and fight or flight all the time. I only realised a couple of weeks ago that I haven't had that happening anymore because I just slowed right down. Yeah. I didn't come back working 80-hour weeks. The SLT were really great and stepped up and leaned in, and I should have done that ages ago, but it took a really bad moment. It's that whole hindsight thing, right? It took a bad moment for me to do that. The other thing I did, and this is going to be part of what makes you happy, is I'm not a dog person, but I got 2 dogs.
Oh, yeah, fuck yeah.
Oh, yeah. My goodness. I've never had a dog in my life. I was really nervous about it. And we got
what
one.
What kind of dogs?
We got Irish Doodles. We got Fergus a couple of years ago, and then we adopted one of his litter mates because she was given back to the breeders. And we moved out to Riverhead. So we moved out of the city and Remuera, and we moved out during that time when, there was a lot of lockdowns. And it was just amazing. I got out of the rat race. I would walk dogs, pat dogs. They love you every second of every day and can't wait to see you. So great. And things like that just slowed me down. Yeah. And I just slowed down a little bit.
I think that's fantastic. Like, 100% feel you. Same thing happened to me. I decided I almost burnt down, had a full-on meltdown and just decided my life needed to change. Because high functioning people that start up businesses are fantastic because they're high functioning, but they also take on so much that they don't give much to themselves. No. And so you get to a certain point if you don't look after yourself where everything just falls down. And so I took some time off and said, hey, I need to go and find myself and fill my own cup again. And then you realise, I don't think I could ever go back to doing what I was. I physically don't have the capacity to go back and doing that anymore.
No. And you start to see, but the thing that's really interesting is you go back to all the people who are looking at you and you remember their faces and they knew that you weren't ready to listen. So it's about timing. And unfortunately, it took a bad situation to get me to listen and wake up. But there were people trying to tell me for years, you can't keep doing this. You can't. It's just not going to work. I'm like, yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. I'll just get up at 2:00. It doesn't matter. And I still do get up very early. But it's just, you start to realise I actually don't enjoy it. Yeah. It's not giving me joy anymore. I'm getting joy from this home life. Oh, God, it's quite fun here with the people, my family, having dinner with them.
And people in the business can do the things.
Oh, they really can. They really, really can. I wish I'd done it sooner.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, same thing for me. Got a new dog and I have so much joy in my life. My dog passed away and I spent like 18 months, like.
I can't imagine. I don't want to think about it.
But now I go home and I live on my own. So I have a week where I live on my own and then a week where I have my kids every second week. And so when you're on your own, like as a startup founder, as a recruitment business owner as well, like holy fuck this year, I go home and I'm like, I just want to crawl up into a bed and cry.
Yeah.
And so then having a little dog that jumps on you and starts licking your face, oh my God, I just, like my...
So good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, my bedroom, because again, 3 massive boys, so my kids are big, tall boys and they fill the house with testosterone and sweat and smell and stuff, but I love them dearly. Getting away is my room, and like it's at the point where I sometimes just have to build a fort with pillows and 2 giant dogs, because these dogs are really big. They're like sort of the size of Alsatians, and they get on the bed, and then I'm just like totally safe in my cave, and that's where I sort of run away. Because when you're working from home, that's changed everything too. How do you get away from work? And so my room is my room away from men, like boys, and the office, and the dogs are not allowed on the bed, but of course that's where they are.
Do you have to leave the house as a part of your day structure, or can you go straight to your office? And
I don't. I didn't. And I've learned this year, I've been making an effort to go and engage with human beings outside of Riverhead.
Yeah.
I've joined the gym, and I go because there's classes and I get to speak to other humans.
Yeah.
Because even though you spend your life in 8 to 10 Zoom meetings a day, it's not the same.
No, it's not real.
At all. And walking the dogs is okay, but it's still, I needed something that was for me without my family, although I love them. I needed to go out and just engage with other people. And I've started doing that this year, and it's made a really big difference.
Yeah, so when I was working from home, or when I do work from home, I have to go out and get a cup of coffee from the cafe, just to walk out first thing in the morning, to be able to socialise, to just wake up, to feel a bit normal. I come home and have my cup of coffee, and then I have to go to the gym at lunchtime, exactly the same, just because A, talk to real people that aren't on a screen, and B, break my day up a little bit so that I can go hard for 3 hours, and just try and be a normal human person. But,
it's a real unlearning of the last 3 years, and then getting back, but also not going back to what it was.
Yeah.
When I was going and flying to Australia every second week, which is terrible from a carbon problem, but it was just constant, just travel. I was travelling 10 or 12 days out of every 4 weeks.
Well, your family must love having you around now.
Yeah. It's
well,
been
3 teenage boys, they probably won't tell you, even if they
They
did.
don't even talk.
No.
No, I'm one of my sons is. I spend a lot of time with him in the car, driving to school and to his extracurricular activities. But I will say that I didn't spend a lot of time with them when they were kids. I was a high-flying kind of CEO person, and or chief operating officer, and I worked and loved work. It's my whole identity, and they were very self-sufficient. But I missed a lot. So I've actually been in the last couple of years investing way more and spending time with them because I needed to.
Yeah.
And I actually had to unlearn some other things. One of my sons, Lorenzo, he is really quick with phone texting and things like that. I get him to do all my emails on the way to school and all my emails on the way back, and we had to stop that. It was a bit too stressful for him.
That's multitasking to the next level.
Yeah,
right?
slap me through. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so knowing all what you know now, and like Dale's in a better place mentally, physically, everything now, what does the future look like now for Weirdly? Like what do you see yourself doing in the...
I think Weirdly was trying for a few years to be the startup unicorn kind of concept where you grow at any cost.
Yeah.
And that growth is the number one strategy. And you make mistakes because you're running so fast and chasing money. And we've just decided that we're going to move to a pathway of profitability, like a lot of businesses, right?
Yeah.
And we thought we were going to take 12 months to do that, and some things have happened which have meant that we're going to bring that decision forward.
Yeah.
We've got a responsibility to our shareholders and to our team to be really honest and say we need to get back to that point, so we'll be doing that, and growing through the acquisition of new customers. And they're big. Right, the customers, so they do make a material difference.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, definitely an interesting year ahead of us for lots of startup founders, and so I really appreciate you coming on and telling your story. I think it's fantastic to hear authentically just you. I knew from the moment I set up this podcast that you would come on and just rip it. you're the epitome of people that just come on and talk and tell their story, and you're going to motivate a lot of people just to be able to say, oh my God, I wasn't alone, or yes, I'm feeling that, or oh, thank you.
I really hope so, because it's helped me listening to all the people that, I mean, I've learned something from every single one that I've listened to so far. And then you saw with Power Suit, you know, where like I heard about them, and then I'm with Kristen, and then I'm like sharing it out everywhere. It's really great, that connection, and I'm really understanding. It really reopened my eyes how much human capital there is in New Zealand that have got such extensive, vast senior experience. And it's just good having that opened back up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I know the answer to my last question to you then already, but what makes you happy?
Obviously my 2 dogs, Fergus and Piper, and spending time with my husband and home. That's been like that, and absolutely addicted to going to the gym.
Yeah, awesome. How is Simon anyway?
He's awesome.
Yeah,
he's good. Loves golf.
Yeah.
It's a new thing that's happened in the last 4 or 5 years. I didn't know what it meant. You know, they said golf, what I had never played before. And
It's in the male birthday card. When you hit 40, you open it up, and down the bottom it says, "By the way, you now play golf." And you're like,
that and whiskey, drinks whiskey.
Yeah.
Those 2 things. Didn't do either of those things. His father came over from the UK and said, "Why don't you give both a go?" Next thing you know, he loves it. And there's a golf course 3 kilometres from our house.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
It's happening a lot faster for me now because my son likes really playing golf. And I was like, well, if I'm going to go out and play golf with him, I better get decent at it. You know?
Yeah. Oh, no, it's a real interesting addiction. But those are the things that make me happy, that slowing down and spending quality time with my family and my dogs.
Awesome. Hey, well, thanks so much for coming on, Dale. I really appreciate it.
No worries at all.
That was a weirdly authentic podcast. I really enjoyed it. It was honest. It was filled with so many nuggets for early stage founders from people that don't have a background in founding companies. It was authentic, and it was honest, and it was filled with highs and lows. Really hope you enjoy that one. I enjoyed chatting with Dale. I want to thank anyone that's subscribed to the podcast already. You're helping us build this community and platform for everyone. And for people that aren't subscribed, please jump on now and help us to continue. Thanks so much.
This podcast is produced by John Otaka from Empire Films.